The afternoon sun bore down on Buenos Aires, its golden rays spilling over the bustling streets. Banco Rio was alive with the usual rhythm of business, the shuffle of papers, the hum of conversations, and the occasional ding of cash registers. It was an ordinary day, until it wasn't. At precisely 12:38 p.m., a group of armed men stormed into the bank. Their movements were precise, almost rehearsed, as if they had done this before. Shouting commands in calm but firm tones, they corralled the bank's customers and employees into a corner. Fear spread like wildfire, yet there was something peculiar about the robbers. They weren't shouting indiscriminately or harming anyone. They seemed oddly controlled, as if they were following a script. One of them, a tall man with piercing eyes and a voice that demanded attention, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "we are here for the bank's money, not yours. Stay calm, and no one will get hurt." The hostages exchanged frightened glances but complied, their hope hinging on his promise. Meanwhile, another robber, smaller in stature but exuding quiet authority, moved to the bank's vault. His hands moved swiftly over the lock mechanism, aided by advanced tools that were clearly not your average street thug's equipment. This was no ordinary robbery. These men were professionals. Outside, chaos was brewing. Police cars screeched to a halt as officers spilled into the streets, taking up defensive positions. News of the heist spread rapidly, drawing a growing crowd of onlookers. Negotiators arrived, their faces grim as they began setting up communication lines with the robbers. Inside the bank, the robbers seemed unfazed by the commotion outside. They worked methodically, as if they had anticipated every possible scenario. The tall man, who appeared to be the leader, answered the phone when it rang. "We're here for the money," he said calmly to the negotiator on the other end. "We don't want any violence, but we will defend ourselves if necessary. All we ask is time." The negotiator tried to prolong the conversation, hoping to buy time for a tactical response, but the leader cut the call short, his tone indicating he wasn't going to waste time on meaningless talk. As the minutes ticked by, the tension inside the bank escalated. But the robbers didn't waver. They moved with purpose, their plan clearly unfolding step by step. Unbeknownst to the hostages and the police, the robbers were playing a different game entirely. In the vault, the smaller robber worked tirelessly, passing the loot into a hidden opening in the floor. Beneath the bank, a meticulously crafted tunnel stretched out into darkness, leading far away from the chaos above. The robbers' every action seemed designed to buy them time, not to escape through the front door but to disappear entirely. It was a brilliant, almost audacious plan, and so far it was working perfectly. The negotiators outside grew increasingly desperate as hours passed with little progress. Inside, the robbers maintained their calm facade, even going so far as to distribute water and snacks to the hostages. "We're not monsters," the leader reassured them. "Just stay calm, and this will all be over soon." What the police didn't know was that it was already too late. Beneath the bank, the robbers were nearing the final stages of their escape. The loot was secured, and the tunnel had been reinforced to ensure a quick and safe getaway. All that remained was the final act of their elaborate charade. Just as the police were preparing to storm the building, a loud bang echoed through the air. Smoke began to fill the bank, and chaos erupted. Hostages screamed, robbers shouted, and the police advanced, thinking they had the upper hand. But by the time they reached the vault, it was empty. The robbers were gone, vanished into thin air like ghosts. Back at the river, miles away from the chaos, the robbers emerged from their tunnel. They moved swiftly, carrying their spoils to waiting boats. As the sound of sirens grew faint in the distance, they sped away, leaving behind a crime scene that would puzzle investigators for years. And so began one of the most remarkable manhunts in Argentine history. The robbers had executed their plan with such precision that it left the authorities scrambling for clues. How had they pulled off such a daring heist under the watchful eyes of the police? Where had they gone? And most importantly, who were they? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the robbers disappeared into the shadows, leaving a stunned city in their wake. The police command center at the scene buzzed with activity. Maps of the bank and surrounding areas were pinned to makeshift boards, and officers shouted updates into radios. The bank vault was empty, and the robbers had vanished, but the authorities were certain they hadn't gone far. Helicopters scoured the area, searchlights sweeping over the city like massive, probing eyes, and roadblocks sprang up on every major artery out of Buenos Aires. Inside the bank, investigators combed through the chaos left behind. They meticulously examined every corner of the vault, searching for clues. One officer noticed something odd. Fine dirt and a faint, lingering smell of damp earth. It didn't match the pristine, polished atmosphere of the vault. A forensic team was called in, and within minutes, they discovered the tunnel hidden beneath a carefully disguised hatch. The tunnel was a marvel of engineering, reinforced walls, an electric lighting system, and even ventilation pipes. It stretched far into the darkness, disappearing into the unknown. It was clear this wasn't the work of amateurs. The robbers had spent weeks, possibly months, digging and perfecting their escape route. The police were both awed and infuriated. They were dealing with a level of sophistication rarely seen. At the other end of the tunnel, the robbers had reached a secluded section of the riverbank, where their getaway boats awaited. They moved quickly but deliberately, securing the cash and valuables into waterproof containers. One of them, a man known among the group as the engineer, checked his watch. "We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule," he said, his tone betraying the slightest hint of satisfaction. The leader, a cold-eyed man referred to only as El Cerebro, the brain, nodded. "No celebration yet. The river patrols could be closer than we think. Let's move." Back at the bank, the discovery of the tunnel sent a shockwave through the task force. The negotiators felt duped. Their hours of careful dialogue had been nothing more than a distraction. Anger flared among the officers, but the chief quickly regained control. "Seal off the tunnel's exits," he barked. "They can't have gotten far." However, the robbers had accounted for this. The tunnel didn't lead to a single exit. It branched off in multiple directions, each one designed to mislead and delay any pursuit. Some sections collapsed intentionally as the robbers passed, leaving behind a trail of rubble and confusion. In the river, the group of robbers navigated through the dim light of the moon, their boats hugging the shadows. They knew the authorities would eventually discover their route, but by then, they intended to be long gone. They had hidden vehicles waiting several miles downstream, ready to whisk them away to safe houses scattered across the countryside. But despite their meticulous planning, there was an unease among them. The heist had gone flawlessly, but escape was the most dangerous part. One mistake could undo everything. The robbers remained silent, their ears attuned to every sound. The soft lapping of water against the boats seemed deafening in the still night. A sudden burst of static on their police scanner made everyone freeze. The authorities were closing in. One of the robbers, El Ojo, the Eye, the group's lookout, leaned forward, straining to hear. "They found the riverbank," he whispered urgently. "We need to pick up the pace." El Cerebro didn't flinch. He adjusted his plan on the fly, signaling for the boats to split up. It was a calculated risk, but he knew it was their best chance. The group reluctantly obeyed, their unity now fractured by necessity. Minutes later, a spotlight pierced the darkness, sweeping over the water. A police patrol boat had entered the area, its engine slicing through the stillness like a knife. The robbers' carefully laid plans were now in jeopardy. Would they outmaneuver the police? Or would this be the moment their perfect heist unraveled? The tension in the boats was palpable, every second stretching into eternity as the robbers held their breath, hoping against hope that their split-second decisions would save them. The police patrol boat drew closer, its engine a relentless hum in the quiet night. The robbers, separated now into 2 boats, moved with silent urgency. In one of the boats, El Cerebro maintained his composure, his sharp mind calculating every possible move. He gestured to El Ojo to cut the engine, allowing their boat to drift into the dense shadows cast by overhanging trees. They barely made a sound as they dipped their oars into the water to steer. In the other boat, the engineer took charge. His group moved toward a pre-planned diversion, a floating decoy filled with empty crates and trash. It was designed to mimic a getaway boat in the faint glow of the moon. As the decoy floated downstream, it carried a faint, strategically placed radio signal, meant to lure the patrol boat away. The police boat slowed as its searchlight caught a faint movement. The decoy had done its job. Shouts erupted from the officers as they veered toward the floating trap, their searchlight illuminating what appeared to be a pile of loot. "They're here," came the cry from the patrol. Officers prepared to board the decoy, confident they had caught their elusive quarry. Meanwhile, El Cerebro and his crew moved swiftly, taking advantage of the diversion. Their boat glided silently past the patrol's position, the distant commotion covering their escape. The plan was working, but El Ojo remained uneasy. "That was too close," he muttered under his breath. El Cerebro responded with an unwavering voice. "Close doesn't count. We move forward." The engineer's boat, however, wasn't faring as well. A second patrol boat appeared from the opposite direction, its spotlight scanning the water like a predator's gaze. The crew froze, their hearts pounding in unison. The engineer whispered, "Hold." Not a sound. The boat drifted, the faint creak of its wooden frame threatening to betray them. The patrol boat paused, its spotlight hovering just meters away. The engineer's hand gripped the edge of the boat, ready to signal a desperate escape. The seconds felt like an eternity. Finally, the patrol moved on, its spotlight sweeping elsewhere. The engineer exhaled, but the reprieve was brief. As they resumed their journey, they heard the distant sound of engines revving. The police were deploying more boats into the river, closing the net. Back at the riverbank, officers found the tunnel exit. The elaborate decoy system had delayed them, but the discovery reignited their determination. Helicopters joined the hunt, their powerful beams now crisscrossing the area. The robbers, though prepared, knew their window was closing. El Cerebro and his group reached the predetermined extraction point, a narrow inlet concealed by thick vegetation. Waiting for them were two vehicles, one disguised as a delivery truck and the other as a maintenance van. The robbers quickly transferred the loot, but there was no time for rest. As they began to drive away, one of the helicopters hovered dangerously close, its beams slicing through the trees. In the rearview mirror, El Cerebro saw it, a flicker of movement that meant they were still being pursued. He picked up the radio and spoke into it with calm authority. "Phase 3. Now." Miles away, a time distraction activated. A massive explosion in an abandoned warehouse near the city. Smoke billowed into the sky, drawing police attention away from the river. The chaos bought the robbers precious time, but it was far from over. The radio crackled with a tense update from the engineer. His team had also reached their extraction point but faced a roadblock ahead. El Cerebro mind raced, devising a way to coordinate their escape routes while avoiding capture. The robbers were skilled and disciplined, but the tension mounted with each passing second. The maintenance van jolted over uneven terrain as it sped away from the river, its engine roaring against the stillness of the night. El Cerebro sat in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning every shadow, every turn. Behind them, the delivery truck followed, the stolen fortune concealed in false compartments. Over the radio, the engineer's voice crackled with urgency. "Blockade 2 kilometers ahead. They're tightening the perimeter." El Cerebro's jaw tightened, his mind a storm of calculations. "Stick to the secondary route. Do not engage. Time is on our side if we keep moving." Meanwhile, the delivery truck driver, El Gato, muttered under his breath. "Secondary route's a maze. One wrong turn and we're done." "Then don't make a wrong turn," El Cerebro replied sharply, his voice a whip of command. He understood the stakes. The stolen $20 million was both their salvation and their curse. Up ahead, the secondary route snaked through an industrial area, a labyrinth of warehouses and dead-end streets. The robbers had scouted it weeks before, but the pressure of the pursuit made every turn feel uncertain. The van's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating rusted metal fences and graffiti-covered walls. In the distance, The faint thrum of helicopter blades grew louder. El Cerebro glanced upward, his mind racing. If the aerial search zeroed in on them, the vehicles would be sitting ducks. He reached for his radio again. El Ojo, status? From a hidden rooftop nearby, El Ojo, the team's lookout, peered through binoculars. Helicopters sweeping southward, but they're circling back. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they're over you. Understood, El Cerebro said. Keep feeding updates. The vehicles pressed on, weaving through the industrial maze. Suddenly, the van's driver slammed the brakes. Ahead, a patrol car idled at a crossroads. Its lights off but its silhouette unmistakable. Backup routes compromised. The driver hissed. El Cerebro didn't hesitate. We go dark. Cut the lights and creep forward. Both vehicles powered down their headlights, moving silently like shadows. The patrol car remained still, its occupants oblivious to the ghostly procession slipping past. Every breath was held, every sound magnified in the stillness. Just as the van cleared the crossroads, the patrol car's engine roared to life, its headlights snapping on. The robbers froze. Had they been seen? The patrol car turned in the opposite direction, its tires squealing as it sped off. A collective exhale filled the van, but the reprieve was short-lived. The helicopter's spotlight suddenly swept over the area, its beams slicing through the industrial maze. El Ojo, they're on us. El Cerebro barked into the radio. I see it. You've got to move now. El Ojo replied, his voice laced with urgency. El Cerebro made a split-second decision. Dump the decoy. In the delivery truck, El Gato hit a concealed switch. A hidden compartment opened, releasing a cascade of fake bills and decoy loot onto the road. The intention was simple: bait the police into stopping for the false treasure. As the helicopter's spotlight caught the fluttering bills, it paused, hovering uncertainly. Moments later, sirens wailed as ground units converged on the scene, thinking they'd struck gold. The distraction worked, temporarily. But as the vehicles neared the edge of the industrial zone, their final obstacle loomed. A checkpoint set up on the only exit road. Armed officers manned the blockade, their flashlights cutting through the night. El Ojo, options? El Cerebro demanded. There's a drainage tunnel 50 meters to your right, El Ojo replied. It leads to the outskirts, but it's a tight fit. El Cerebro made the call. We ditched the vehicles. Everyone on foot to the tunnel. Go! The robbers abandoned the vehicles, hauling duffel bags filled with their true loot. They sprinted toward the drainage tunnel, their breaths ragged, their footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. Behind them, the sound of sirens grew louder. The police had discovered the decoy and were closing in. The robbers plunged into the tunnel, the narrow passage swallowing them in darkness. But as they moved deeper into the labyrinth, the tension escalated. The robbers navigated the narrow drainage tunnel, their breaths harsh in the damp air. The walls were slick with condensation, and the echo of their hurried footsteps amplified every sound, making it impossible to discern if someone was following them. Ahead, El Cerebro led the way, his flashlight beam bouncing erratically as they moved deeper into the labyrinth of pipes and water channels. El Ojo, El Cerebro called into his radio, his voice taut with tension. How much further? A moment of static, then El Ojo's reply came through. 300 meters. The tunnel will bring you out near a deserted construction site. But they've dispatched K-9 units. You need to hurry. The group pressed on, but exhaustion was setting in. Carrying heavy duffel bags of stolen cash and valuables, their pace slowed. El Gato, usually the calm one, began to snap. We should have dumped some of this haul. What's the use if we get caught carrying it? We take everything, El Cerebro shot back. We didn't risk everything to leave empty-handed. Keep moving. Suddenly, the faint sound of barking echoed through the tunnel. The robbers froze, their blood running cold. The K-9 units were closing in. Panic rippled through the group, but El Cerebro held firm. We split up, he decided. Drop some decoy bags to slow them down. Stick to the planned exit. Regroup at the safe house. Reluctantly, the team followed his instructions, discarding a few bags of fake loot and scattering into different passages. El Cerebro and El Gato stuck to the main route, the barking and footsteps behind them growing louder. Finally, a faint light appeared ahead, the tunnel exit. El Cerebro pushed forward, his lungs burning, his mind racing with strategies for their next moves. As they emerged into the open air, the desolate construction site stretched before them, shadows of half-built structures looming against the night sky. But their relief was short-lived. In the distance, the sound of engines roared, police vehicles closing in on their position. The distraction had worked only briefly, and now the net was tightening. This way, El Cerebro hissed, leading El Gato toward a concealed path behind the construction site. They navigated through debris and machinery, their eyes darting for any sign of escape. Just as they reached the edge of the site, a spotlight swept over them. "Freeze!" A voice boomed, followed by the distinct click of weapons being readied. El Cerebro raised his hands slowly, his mind racing for a way out. But before he could act, El Gato made a reckless decision. Dropping his bag, he bolted toward the riverbank, hoping to escape into the water. The officers shouted commands, but El Gato didn't stop. A shot rang out and he collapsed mid-stride, his body tumbling to the ground. The remaining officers closed in on El Cerebro, their weapons trained on him. Calmly, he lowered himself to his knees, a faint smirk on his face. "You caught me," he said, his tone almost mocking. "But you won't catch the others. And you won't find all the money." His words sent a ripple of unease through the officers. As they secured him and searched the area, they realized he wasn't bluffing. The tunnel had multiple exits, and the rest of the crew had vanished into the night, along with the majority of the stolen fortune. News of the robbery and El Cerebro's arrest spread quickly, but the details of the heist remained shrouded in mystery. While authorities recovered some of the money, most of the $20 million haul was never found. To this day, rumors swirl about what happened to the rest of the crew and the treasure they carried. As for El Cerebro, his trial became a spectacle, but he never revealed the full plan, nor the whereabouts of the missing loot. For him, the greatest triumph wasn't the heist itself but the enigma he left behind, a legacy of brilliance and audacity that would haunt investigators for years.